Hello, everybody. It is January 28, 2021, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and I am Professor Hamamoto. And today I have prepared a quite fascinating talk for you. The title is Pokemon, Archipelago, and the Gamification of Reality. I really envy you for what you are about to experience. Let me give you a sort of a backstory on how I came to this topic. Let's see, I think it was around the early, maybe the mid 80s. This is at UC Irvine, and I was still kind of trying to find my way into the academic world. It was quite a struggle, and part of the problem was that I had this interest, this research and professional interest in an area that had not yet begun to be taken seriously, and that's popular culture and media. So one aspect of my interest intersected with a personal interest and professional interest in Japan. And I had early on, back in 1976, written a paper for a course at Bowling Green State University called Japanese Popular Culture. And people didn't say, well, what is that? They don't really produce anything. It's just a bunch of garbage and junk that they manufacture. Of course, if you grew up in the 50s and 60s, that perception was common, and it wasn't really that far off base. For example, if you opened a box of Cracker Jacks, which was a candy back then, it was kind of expensive. It was caramel corn is what it was. A little bit of peanuts in there, 2 or 3. They were always kind of find them at the bottom, so you can. It was really exciting to dig down into the bottom and get those last pieces of peanuts. But there was a free toy in there, and it was usually a toy made out of old recycled tin cans, it looked like. They were just kind of cut up and slapped together, and it said Made in Japan. It was a little deal there. So that was our perception. It started to change a little bit when transistor radios started coming in around 63, 64, right in time for the big music explosion for our generation that was coming up in the 60s, and the Beach Boys prior to that. So that was Japan of that time. And the reason I'm giving this backstory is some of the younger people who are watching this are not going to really be that astounded by some of the revelations about the sophistication of Japanese popular culture today in 2021. But if you take it back, not that long ago, Japan was coming out of World War II after having industrialized rapidly to compete with the Western imperial powers, including the United States of America. And I already gave you the backstory on that one with Sakamoto Ryoma and him being a Scottish free right Mason, and Commodore Perry coming in, who was also a Freemason, coming and trying to take over the country. So, and then of course that led to the Russo-Japanese War, the involvement in World War I, and then again, Japan taking on the mighty British Empire and defeating it, by the way. And then here comes the United States to reinforce and, of course, take over that part of the world. This is in what we call World War II. They call it, Japan calls it Taiheiyo Senso, which means the Great Eastern Ocean War, Eastern Pacific War. They still call it the Pacific War, or we call it, because for them it was more regional, and for the United States and Britain, it's about gaining a whole huge world empire, which we're still contending over to this very day. And part of the argument of this talk is that we are contending for this global empire in ways that are non-kinetic warfare. In fact, that's probably a minor part of it. Most of it is mind war, as most of you know by now, and it's cultural warfare, right? Through language, through the popular culture, of course, through sports, through entertainment, through movies, what other social media, all of it goes into this larger contention for real estate and I would argue even spiritual and psychic properties of humanity. That's the current war we're involved with right now. So it only makes sense that Japan, that was defeated in a kinetic war, this is what the Pentagon calls it, kinetic warfare. That's what tanks and explosives, ordnance, soldiers, and all that. And by designating kinetic warfare, that means they have an alternative, or they're moving into a different direction. And we saw just a glimpse of it at the recent election, and also January 6th, right? And that's cyber war, correct? That's where we're in now. That's what we're seeing, of course, supplemented by the ultimate threat of kinetic warfare, invasion, and occupation. So all of this fits in here. All of it and more funnels through the seemingly innocuous character or characters. I think there are about 800 of them now, grouped under this rubric of Pokemon. The accent's on the second syllable, by the way, Pokemon. Short for pocket monster, appropriately enough. And I'll talk a little bit about how that term, how that brand evolved, because it's very much in keeping. This is a discovery that I made today, a connection I made today. It's very much in keeping where I think world society is heading in the early 21st century, if we allow it to go in that direction. And part of this exercise that we're going through today is the attempt to avert this predetermined world that the social engineers, the planners, and of course the bankers who sit atop of this entire system, and they're hereditary, right? They're connected by ancient bloodlines. This exercise here is not just playtime, right? This is not Lego play for me. This is about the survival of the species. So don't try to understand it too quickly. Don't come into this talk with the sense that, oh yeah, artificial reality, augmented reality. Yeah, I know. I read about that. I saw YouTubes on that, so I know everything about it. Well, you don't, and I don't, and the people who are claiming expertise, who are writing about it, researchers and academia, don't know either. Right? It's all up for grabs. So we have a voice in it. We have a say so. We can intervene at a very basic level and help shape our own political destiny and direct history in a way that we want to see, which is pro-human. At least that's my prejudice. And I think the majority of humanity shares that prejudice. I think a lot of technocrats do as well. They just are on the wrong track. They think they're helping us. In fact, that's usually the excuse for these innovations and imposing. They're helping us. They're saving us. They're preventing us from getting the common cold. They're preventing us from falling into poverty, blah, blah. Or they're educating us, or they're training us to the new information economy. Man, if that's benevolence, please give me an enemy. Give me an enemy that I can see and recognize, instead of someone who's coming through the side door through the auspices of some sort of foundation, and they give it some caring, touchy-feely name like Planned Parenthood, right? Which the original name was more accurate and more honest. So. The language. I mean, George Orwell told us about the political misuse of speech and all these different language games and tricks that are played on us. But we're also not immune to that either, myself included. So I think we got a glimpse, as I alluded to earlier, of what I call augmented reality warfare. Augmented reality warfare, ARW. This is Professor Hamamoto's phrase. Maybe someone else has used it. If you've already used it in the past and you've published an article, you can lay claim to it. That really doesn't matter. All I'm trying to establish is that we need new conceptual apparatus and terminology and phrases to fully understand these new realities. Right? We can't just go by the old terminology, because it's bringing in the old mindset and the old ways of understanding into today's situation, which is qualitatively quantitative, maybe fundamentally different. It's analogous, but it's distinct enough to give it a new term, and I call it augmented reality warfare. January 6th at the U.S. Capitol, and it was no coincidence that it was rolled out on the Capitol You can go back a couple of weeks and see some of my earlier presentations talking about the occult aspects of the Capitol and the ellipse and President Donald Trump, Commander-in-Chief, going out there to give a talk there. And I brought in the entire the bloodline of the First Lady Melania Knobs / Trump, right? All of that goes into it. So I've been there. I've talked about it a little bit. So I'm going to deepen that analysis by showing how an innocuous fictional, right, quote unquote, fictional character or character set, a population called Pokemon, has, in a sense, can claim the victory in this first phase of this battle, this augmented reality war. There are going to be many skirmishes in the future, and this talk hopefully will allow us to better identify them and therefore anticipate them and ultimately emerge victorious over the different points of attack that are hitting us. Again, this is not playtime for me. This is about survival. And I happen to be able to read the culture and society in a way that few people can equal. So please don't tell me that I should check out Jordan Peterson or that ass clown at Portland State, because they're not good enough to carry my jockstrap, even though they have representation from creative arts, agents and all that stuff, and book contracts, and YouTube is consciously putting them out there so that whenever you put a search on there, their name comes up at number one. All right, because I'll use Mike Tyson's favorite phrase whenever an opponent's name was raised to him by some sports journalist, Iron Mike would say, "Yeah, that bum, he's not worthy of carrying my jockstrap." And so I say the same thing to, I keep forgetting the guy's name at Portland State. Why don't you write it down here in the comments? But his claim to fame is that he wouldn't stay home when the little punky students, the undergraduates, said, "No white people allowed on campus. You got to stay home." Yeah, all right, punks. And by the way, the reason I mention these punks is a lot of them are the product of this process that I'm going to be talking about today. This entrainment, I guess, to put it in common terms, but I think it goes it goes to entrainment and past it. And we're not fully in this new state of being, but from what I'm seeing on the streets with all the fake, well, they're real, but I mean, these are staged acts of violence in places like Portland, or what we saw in the Capitol and major metropolitan areas. These little LARPers, and they're real and they're dangerous. I don't discount that. Taking over freeways, going on the freeway, stopping people, beating up people, attacking them. They are the product of this this social epileptic fit. And I don't want to disparage or make fun or make light of people who suffer from epilepsy. I'm just trying to draw an analogy of what I am seeing unfold so far as behavior is concerned by these people who are out there. It's not good enough to just call them a bunch of libtards and Antifa and BLM and think that's going to change anything, right? We're beyond that. I think 90% of the YouTubers are locked into name calling, and I don't want to contribute to that noise. I want to provide signal, not noise. So we saw that. We saw the live action role play, the Mercs, the LARP Mercs. How's that one? You like memes? Ellie Alexander thought he was going to get, the election back. He thought he was going to get President Trump back in office, right, or to maintain office by the power of the meme. That's what we were told. Yeah, meme warfare. Yeah, stop the steal. That's a bunch of bull. And if anybody believes that, you are probably a product of the Pokemon universe. But because this is a game for big boys, all right? Put your big boy pants on and get real. We're in for a wild, hairy ride here. Okay, so let's get serious. And I'm entertained by me. I think they're very clever. I like advertising jingles too. Things go better with Coke, or it's the real thing, or you need a Happy Meal today, or please inject this virus into your brain. All these advertising slogans. I get it. I saw Don Draper on Mad Men. I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and we were hit relentlessly by TV, by what are now called memes. We used to call them jingles or slogans. It doesn't make it any more relevant or profound if you call it a meme instead of a jingle, right? So we saw Mr. Q Shaman, that's what he calls himself, AKA also known as Jake and Jelly. And of course, that sounds like a fake name, and it is a fake name. His legal name is Jacob Anthony Chansley. And some of you in the chat room there, why don't you tell me who his daddy is? I think he's connected to the military. His father is a general or an officer or something like that, right? I mean, this guy is not an organic dissenter or protester. He's producer. He's an actor of some sort, even though he denies that he has any sort of connection with Antifa or so-called BLM. He has been seen in different pictures and photos and accounts protesting, being a counter-protester. But that's part of the memo. But it really doesn't matter who this guy Jacob Anthony Chansley is. What does matter is that he showed up, and this live action, this LARP merc, helped to distract an entire population of Americans from the real issues that are confronting us. And it goes beyond the personalities involved, Joe Biden, Donald Trump. They're really bit actors in a larger transformative moment in not just American history, but in world history. And so, yeah, we have another one of the people, and I don't want to, criticize him because he's a great speaker and he's very entertaining, and it's obvious that he enjoys listening to himself talk. And I know he's a celebrity attorney. He defended the Ramseys, and he even helped Richard Jewell at the Atlanta bombing. But Lynn Wood says that Anthony Chansley, Jacob Ansley Chanley, or Angeli, or Q Shaman was a Antifa asset posing as a Trump supporter. It doesn't really matter anymore. It doesn't matter. The election is over. Lynn Wood is over. His, whatever political aspiration, I wish him well. Maybe he'll be the governor of Georgia one day, but he doesn't matter. And I'm not paying attention to him. Just as when he showed up on the scene, I tried to ignore him as well. And I think I was right about that. Now, Q Shaman refers to himself appropriately enough, as a digital soldier. So he grew up with it in this milieu. He knows what he's talking about, right? He's a lot smarter than he lets on with the horns and all the body paint and all that. He's got a lot on his brain that we're not seeing. But anyway, let's leave him for a while. So what I am sensing, and I haven't fully come to a definitive model of this transformation that's taking place. And perhaps I'm guilty myself of coming up with new phrases, phrase mongering, right? Meme making. But I don't do it gratuitously. I want to do it because we're dealing with new realities. So I'll come up with another phrase for you. And I call it perceptual podification, right? Oh, by the way, I should tell you, for the literate people out there, you know that the title of this talk, Pokemon Archipelago, that alludes to who? Alexander Solzhenitsyn, right? Nobel Prize laureate. He's a Nobel laureate for literature. And he wrote the classic Gulag Archipelago. So I call this Pokemon Archipelago as sort of an homage to Solzhenitsyn, but also an update on what he was describing to us back when that book was published in 1974. And he spent 10 years in the Gulag, right? This is a serious individual, serious literary artist who put himself on the line against an oppressive government and paid the price for it. So he has all the credibility in my mind. The people who are sitting in their mother's basement doing little YouTube casts and doing this and that and the other, are coming up with little cute phrases and meme mongering. You're not an activist. You're a lightweight, and you're part of the problem. Even if you call yourself independent, even if you hate the libtards, quote unquote, or you're a Trump lover and all that stuff. You're now part of the problem. You're part of the noise. You're not part of the signal. So find a new job or stay on YouTube. I really don't care because I'm trying to get off YouTube as fast as I can. I don't like the medium, and just in the same sense that I'm trying to avoid what I just alluded to earlier, perceptual podification. I don't want to live in a pod. I don't want to live in an enclosure. I don't want to be hemmed in. Don't fence me in, as Gene Autry saying, right? That old Western song, like cowboy tune. It's inhuman. It's unnatural. It's not what we were destined to be as sentient beings. We're meant to be free and sovereign, and definitely not pod people. So this notion of podification, P-O-D, podification, where did it come up with? Well, I watch a lot of movies, and I need to watch a lot more to catch up, and also to backfill on all the great, wonderful cinema that I missed and is now disappearing off Netflix. And some of it's going to Amazon, but some of it's just disappearing. So I'm filling in. But I noticed that among certain different films that pods loomed large as a plot point or perhaps a secondary feature of the film. Let me be more specific. Let's start with the invasion of the body snatchers. 1956. I was just a little kid when that movie came out. Later, I saw, when I was, able to sit up and feed myself in front of the television. They played reruns over and over again, but I just thought it was a crazy science fiction movie. But it was really, as we learned later, it was a parable. It was an allegory about the Red Scare, right? The old McCarthy era, as it's been characterized and mischaracterized, by the way. So the pod people were these alien creatures, and they were communists, and everybody at that time was scared that there was going to be a communist takeover in the 1950s. Maybe that fear was justified circa 2020 or 2021. But that's neither here nor there. The pod was the creature, the scary feature, the menace that came from outer space and was terrestrial as well. And then we can go to 1968, right? 2001, A Space Odyssey. Open the pod door, Hal. Open the pod door, right? Hal meaning IBM. Famous phrase. Then The Matrix, 1999, right? The Wachowski brothers. Today they would be called the Wachowski siblings, for those of you who've been keeping up with the latest advances in sex reassignment surgery, right? 1999, The Matrix. And what? There's this money shot, right? The money scene. All these people are in pods, and they are like, they're batteries, man. They're power supplies. What they're powering, they never really got into. Even the sequel, I really wasn't clear. It was a confused jumble, but I got the fact that we sentient human beings had been put in little cocoon. Oh, there's another movie I forgot. It's called Cocoon, right? Cocoons, they're sort of like pods. So I add that to the list. Who directed it? Was that Ronnie Howard? Little Ronnie Opie from the Andy Griffith Show. I think he did that. Maybe I'm wrong. Correct me. All right. All you fact checkers out there. Yeah, correct me right now on the chat. But I'm doing this in real time, so I'm not Googling it like you are. So The Matrix, 1999, the pod people. Then we have Avatar. Man, that was crazy. I saw that in a huge widescreen theater in the Distrito Federal, otherwise known as Mexico City. And it was the crazy opening scene. Didn't that guy come out of a pod or some kind of saran wrap, some kind of chrysalis, or some sort of, he metamorphosed out of some sort of a slimy, greasy, ugly substance, some gelatinous glue, bovine growth hormone, mucilage glue. I don't know. That's the Avatar. That's us, right? That's us. And of course, that's 2009. Avatar. And preceding that by a few years was none other than the iPod. The iPod, introduced in 2001. You think you've had the little iPod pods in your head for all your life, but you've only had them in there since 2001. Those little cheap little pods, and they said, "Oh, these are so bad." And of course, they made it purposely crappy so that by the time they made one that's wireless and that can stay in your ear and inject all that toxin straight into your auditory nerves, then you would welcome it. Oh man, I'm so glad that Apple finally solved the problem of the useless iPod inserts. They're not really headphones because they don't go around your head; they go right into your neurological system, right? Pretty soon you won't even need the little wireless ones. They can just beam it to you through 6G technology. So today, the pod, P-O-D, that designates the real life environment as opposed to second life environment, which I'll talk about in a moment. This designates the real life environment into which we, human beings, are being herded into. We're being herded into, we're being lured into it. We're being seduced into it. And this is en route to their perceived, and everybody knows this, right? It's out in the open. It's announced. Klaus Schwab says so. This is part of the reset. And they have all the papers, the books and the white papers that are put out there as part of the metaphysical rule or revelation of the method. But this podification starts at the perceptual level, but it will be a corporeal, real life execution, let's say, as was predicted in the Matrix. And it was also previewed in the simulation called Second Life, which started around 2001, 2002. Let me take a few minutes here to talk a little bit about Second Life if you are not already familiar with it. And I am not a player, or I'm not a participant, or a citizen, or a denizen, or a netizen of Second Life. That used that term early on when all these propagandists were trying to sell us on the wonders of the internet. They said, "Oh, this is going to be better than citizenship. This is going to be netizenship. There'll be never a crooked election again. All our government officials will be strictly accountable to us. There'll be a cultural renaissance." And my gosh, that's being a netizen, right? I didn't buy the hype back then. And of course, we've seen that it's a negative utopia that's been given us by all these cheerleaders. And they probably knew it. They, like I said, we're lured into it. We're seduced into our own forms of bondage. So this is Second Life, all right. And then after I talk a little bit about spend a couple minutes on Second Life, which is produced by a company in San Francisco called Linden Labs. And if I'm not mistaken, isn't the linden tree has some sort of a cult connection, some sort of pagan worship type of, you tell me there on the chat, something along those lines. And then we'll go into this more specific story of Pokemon Go prehistory, because it came out of an earlier video games, right? It's sort of a progression here that we're seeing. So Second Life, and just very quickly, I first became acquainted with it through a friend of mine who I just kind of lost touch with him. And I had known him since junior high school, from 7th grade, 8th grade. We were in the band together. He played the drums. I was in the clarinet section. And we kept in touch, all that time. And then he started just kind of dropping off the radar. And then, I went to visit him one time, and he was just obsessed with Second Life. His RL, which he taught me the abbreviations, right? RL, real life, had to a large degree been moved over into Second Life. And he ran me through it, and I don't want to be judgmental or anything, and I just kind of watched patiently and saw how the little avatars would go from room to room, and you can make money, and It's like, it has a lot of characteristics of RL or real life, but it's Second Life. You can play with people all over the world. So that was my introduction. That piqued my curiosity. So I started gathering literature on it. There's been a couple of academic books on it, which I haven't read, and I wouldn't say fully mastered, but I know that Second Life is a huge player in this VR or AR, augmented reality world that has been constructed for us as a portal, as a way station into the full podification, if you want to call it, or encapsulation. That's another term that needs to be part of our analytical language here, not just podification, but encapsulation or enclosure, right? What do they have all in common? They're all about containment. They're about constraint. They're about unfreedom. And it has historical precedence in Britain and England. There was something called the Enclosure movement, and Karl Marx himself in England, his sponsor, who was a capitalist, by the way, because when you get down to it, Marxism and socialism, communism, capitalism, at the apex, they're all the same corporatist power tripping, top-down, oligarchic control system. But in England, there was something called the Enclosure movement, and that's what helped starve tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of not just Englishmen, Welshmen, but Irish people, notably, right? The famine, and it was a potato famine and all that. That's a cartoon version of it. It was part of a larger plan, a social engineering plan to selectively target populations for starvation and elimination. How? Through enclosure, through what today we're doing in the cyber world, through podification, right? So it has these historical RL, real life precedents that we're seeing today, but the plan is different. The technology is unique, and that's why it requires a new way of understanding, and it requires a bit of humility. When you come to this talk here, don't try to understand this too quickly, because I don't really fully comprehend what is transpiring, but I'm making a valiant attempt to work with you and trying to figure it out. When I say with you, I would like to take this time to invite people who grew up in this technology, this milieu, who grew up with Space Invaders or later generation games. And I would ask you to start writing your thoughts, interviewing other people, taking oral histories, just kind of stepping outside of that immersive world of video games and look at it objectively and see what's really happening with you, with the world, and what its end game is. And together we'll pull our resources, and we'll have a seminar about this, and we'll write about it. And this is how we will defeat the experts, right? From a grassroots participant observation, if you want to call it that, participant observation research. So that's your assignment. So get all the younger people in there, or there people are now in their 40s who grew up with the video game revolution, and your insights are key to this. I'm providing a conceptual, historical, analytical model or apparatus, but I need content, to put it in today's parlance. I need people who are involved in this world so we can look at it, the specifics of it, not just the theory of it. And I'm lacking in that, I will tell you, because I came up in the pinball world and playing ping pong and playing real baseball and not Dance Revolution. I went to dances. I heard live bands. There was no Apple, what's it called, Bandcamp, or I try to ignore it. I try to keep it on my mind. That's why the name escapes me. But it comes loaded in your Apple computers, and I won't touch it. So very briefly, Second Life. It was. And again, these are just names. These are people like Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates who are put in front there in order to front for probably DARPA or some other entities, right? His name is Philip Rosedale, a.k.a. Philip Linden. And what he had done is to envision this alternate universe, this virtual world, right? That's the story, that's the legend. And he envisioned this in childhood, like a lot of us did, right? Play make-believe. So in 1994, he thought that, and he had the training experience, that he could use the internet, which was still fairly new for civilians. He could use the internet in order to construct this vision that he had. And I'm sure he had a lot of help with people, from people who wore uniforms and had 3 or 4 stars on their shoulders, right? Those type of people, the ones that are running the country today. Those are the ones that he was getting his orders and his funding from, most likely. So in 1999, he founded Linden Labs, headquartered in San Francisco. If any of you work there or have worked there or know people do, I'd like to speak with you. I'd like to interview. I'd like you to help create this database of people who are in this field, this oral history, if you will, so that we can collaborate and combine our talents to come up with a comprehensive plan to defeat, not in the way the Unabomber wanted to, but to circumvent, let's say, this world, this dystopia that is waiting for us down the line here. So Second Life preceded, or sort of parallel, this movement here, this Pokemon Go phenomenon. And some of you remember, it's in your recent history. I know it's in my memory, recent memory, because I was on towards the tail end of my stint over at the University of California, Davis, and Pokemon Go really hit big. Now, but before that, let me just give you a little bit of autobiographical information. As I stated before, I first came about my understanding of the importance of Japanese popular culture way back in 1976, but I first saw my vision, my anticipation of Japanese popular culture becoming popular in America by the early 1980s. And that's when I was teaching at UC Irvine. I was a lecturer, a lowly lecturer, right? No one had to take me seriously. I was just passing through. And I went to the bookstore, as was my wont, and I saw that there was an auxiliary. There was a building, a separate building, a purpose-built facility devoted to anime. That's short for animation, right? That's Japanese animation. They call it anime. And at the time, it was all VHS, and it was fully stocked. They had some manga, and I used to buy some of it. And I don't have any examples of you at hand, but Japan has a long traditions of what today are called graphic novels or comics, and take it very seriously. And it's not a children's medium. Today, graphic novels, thanks to people like Neil Gaiman and who's the wizard who wrote V for Vendetta, right? You know his name out there in the chat room. Thanks to people like that and Frank Miller, The Dark Knight, and the revival of DC Comics and making it more adult, graphic novels more recently are given a lot of literary credibility, rightfully so, justifiably so. But in Japan, that was never a question. The distinction between the high culture and that is comics or manga being part of low culture anime didn't really exist. They took it seriously. They admired. They had people like Miyato, the guy that did Princess Mononoke, right? He admired people like Walt Disney and some of the earlier German, animators, right? As well as some of the early Japanese, and there are other Asian groups. There's some animators in China that were doing silent type of animation that people like Miyazato was Miyazato. I'm sorry, I gave you the wrong name. Miyazato Hayao, right? For those of you who are fact checking me. So I said, okay, yeah, it's happening. Just like I saw, at Bowling Green, that the popular culture. So I started gathering material. This is before the days of the commercial internet. And I said, I'm onto something here. I'm going to keep tabs on this. And I have through the years. And around, I think by the mid 80s, the otaku phenomenon in Japan started getting attention in the USA and outside of Japan. And otaku, I think it relates. A journalist coined the term, but it sort of a categorical designation of a certain type of young individual, teenage, preteen, teenage guy, or maybe even in your early 20s, who is obsessed with video games or gameu and manga, and that's about all. Then they live in their mother's house or their parents' house, and they eat bento bought with, of course, a can of oolong cha, or oolong tea, getting from the machine downstairs, right? I mean, that was their existence. And they would also go to the arcades or game center or play center. So this was the otakus, and they became cool. And today, being an otaku is cool for a lot of young people internationally. But it started in Japan, and this is the beginnings of where Japan started to be considered to be the destination point for all, contemporary popular culture. And believe me, the social science, behavioral scientists took note of it, and they said, this is our chance. This is our way. This is our opportunity to steer world civilization, world government, the World Federation of Consciousness. That's a fictitious organization that I just made up on the spot. The World Federation of Global Sentience, right? This is our way to really dictate how and where and why it's going to go in a certain direction. So today, of course, anybody that's living and breathing and paying half attention knows that Japanese popular culture, it's global in scope. Even in South Korea, where the government pretends to hate Japan, which they really don't. The leadership of each other make snide and ugly comments, and they orchestrate the respective populations against each other so that they can control their own domestic population. That's what's really going on there. But it's very popular. Japanese popular culture is popular in South Korea and in China, which again has a big boner against Japan, probably justifiably so. Not that Mao Zedong was a saint either, with his 60, 70 million people that died over the course of his emperorship, right? So they frowned upon it, but that didn't stop the Japanese popular culture from growing all over the world. So let me talk more specifically about the individual that is credited for the Pokemon franchise. And again, he's probably a guy very brilliant and reclusive and maybe even a genius, but he is a guy that the social planners and the funders, probably the bankers, the House of Mitsui and the House of Rothschild and Chase Man, all those people just say, okay, this is we want the world to look. Okay, Tajiri Satoshi, we're going to give you this franchise. We're going to call it Pokemon, and you're going to be the visionary. We're going to give you the credit for inventing the internet, right? Or coming up with Microsoft Word, or being the king of Apple, right? That's going to be you. You're going to be the Pokemon guy. You're going to be the man, the go-to man. His name is Tajiri Satoshi, born 1965. And his given name, Satoshi. I think that was probably borrowed by this fictitious character, right? Satoshi Nakamura. Does that ring a bell? Yes, Bitcoin. I think that was a homage because these guys have a sense of humor. I really like these. By the way, if I sound like I'm disparaging these people like Tajiri Satoshi, far from it. I have a lot of respect for them. I admire them to a large. I admire a lot of the game heads. I wish I had the time and had been born 20 years later so that I could be fully steeped into it, so that I would have emerged out of the chrysalis, out of the pod, as a game head. I would have existentially absorbed all the nuances of that whole universe, that epistemology of gameology or gameheadology. So if you're a gamehead, please don't take offense. I love you. I respect you. I want you to start writing about your experiences and putting and publishing them, putting them out there, and join into this research effort. So that's his name, Satoshi, right? First name, family name Tajiri, right? So he was interested in collecting insects. He wanted to be an entomologist when he grew up, right? And I mention that because, not coincidentally, a lot of these social engineers are very much interested in, guess what? Insects. And you know where I'm going with this, right? You can anticipate the fact that these people probably look at us like bugs. They want to collect us. They want to put a pin through us and stick us and mount us on that so they can look at it with the magnifying glass or a telescope or an electron telescope, right? None other than Professor Alfred Kinsey of the University of Indiana. He was a bug man. He was not a sexologist. He was not a sex expert. He was not in any of the behavior. He was an entomologist. I think he wrote his doctoral dissertation on the fruit fly, which is one of the most studied insects because of its reproducibility and expendability, I guess. I don't know. But that's him. He was a bug man. And I think he did look at humanity like insects that you could just kind of manipulate and kind of look at, and also be really kinky as well, which I'll get to that in a moment, because a lot of these research centers, as I'll discuss here, are very much enmeshed in kinky, sexy types of activity for not just blackmail, but also as a form of study. Because, man, you want to talk about social control? You want to talk about cultural engineering? Well, you got to hit them in the sexuality. That kick them right in that spot, and they're going to like bend over, double over in pleasure. So, out of necessity, because Tajiri, like a lot of kids who grew up in the 60s by that time, most urban centers, Tokyo, and I don't know where he grew up, but let's say he grew up in, one of the major cities. Even the smaller cities are huge conurbations of concrete and wires everywhere. And it's not the Japan that you see in the postcards. Maybe places in Kyoto or rural Japan, or maybe Okinawa, you can see some of that pristine air. But most of it's built over concrete, and everybody is living, guess what? They're living in a compartment. They're living in a capsule. They call them apatos, which is a Japanese pronunciation of apartment, but they're nothing like what we know. Or if it's a little bigger, by the way, like it has 2 rooms instead of just 1 room where you do everything, sleep, eat, and whatever, and watch TV and play video games. That's an apato. But if you have maybe 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, that's called a mansion. Which is a corruption of the English word mansion. It's not a mansion. It's tiny. It's a capsule. It's a capsule existence. And some of you are anticipating where I'm going with this. This is the type of life that we are being shepherded into or seduced into here in America, because we're getting all this hype about the Green New Deal and the exhaustion of all these resources, which is bogus, right? You know this. And there's no more room. We're running out of space. We're going to have to be in these stacked cities and with no automobiles and no mobility, right? So Japan is a prototype of that. I think some of these engineers said, "Hey man, we think this is great. We'd like that. We like the modern Japanese lifestyle that prevented Tajiri from going out and capturing bugs. He liked to collect them, which used to be it still is to a certain extent. It was a hobby, more than it's a passion for a lot of Japanese children, and even into adulthood. They like to collect these beetles. I think they're called kabuto generically, which means helmet, because they look like these transformers, and they find them in the trees, and they make interesting sounds in the summertime. Those are called simi. They collect those too. They collect all kinds of bugs, and they fight them or they raise them and all that. But he couldn't do that because he lived in the city. So what did he do? He invented characters that later became Pokemon, right? His first, but before that, he had to come up with videos, right? Born in 1965. So his first video mania was Space Invader, or what we call Space Invaders, 1978. And that's an arcade game. And I say arcade, those are the days when you had to physically get out of your apato and walk down the street to go to a 6, 7, 8-foot story arcade or a game center. And each floor was stocked full of all these really bulky machines that you just pop 100 N coins over and over again. Perfect for a gangster type money laundering, let's say, and I won't go there, but I think there's a very strong connection, as you might imagine, between organized crime, the government, and these people who come up with these technologies, just like in America, just like everywhere else, right? So space invaders. So here's where my thesis, my working hypothesis, it's not even a glorified thesis, it's a hypothesis, it's a guess right now. But here's one of my guess about our encapsulation, our podification is reinforced. It's not confirmed, but it's given more credence by the fact that Tajiri-san originally called Pokemon capsule monsters. Capsules. That's so he's talking about capsules. And by the way, you know that places like Osaka or Tokyo have these capsule hotels where you just go in, it's funny, right? You go in there and you just pay maybe equivalent of $30-$40, and you can take a shower here, but that's all it is. It's just a capsule, man. You go in there and there's maybe a little radio, and you wake up and you shower and you go to work. This is if you get caught late at night, you drank and you miss the last train out of Tokyo back to the suburb. You just stay in town and check in at the capsule hotel. So that's this whole idea of living in a capsule or encapsulation is already part of the Japanese consciousness and popular culture. So the capsule monster, shortened to kapuman for capsule. Japanese language, they often shorten terms. Like I was horrified to learn that Jimi Hendrix is referred to amongst Japanese people as Jimmy Hen, not Jimi Hendrix, but Jimmy Hen. So that's so Pokemon is short for pocket monster, as I told you before. And again, let me tell you one final time before we conclude our session here, and I haven't even gotten halfway through, I don't think. I might have to do a part 2 if you're interested, or I'll be on to a new topic, even more exciting and entertaining than this one here that you are being delighted by at this very moment. Here again, okay, we see the process of podification, of encapsulation that's being foregrounded. Now, let me ask you, does this sound suspiciously what is being proposed and in some certain cases already being enforced upon us here in January 2021? Yes. So Pokemon was a proof of concept exercise rolled out in Japan, going global, and of course educating or socializing a new generation who doesn't know anything else to say, yeah, this is where we need to go. So when AOC puts out her Green New Deal, they go, yeah, that's great. That's just what we've been waiting for, because we're the Pokemon generation. So let me move quickly. I'm running out of time here. The Pokemon Go mania, and I don't have to go through the chronology because all of us listening, most of us have experienced it personally and witnessed it. And there's all these academic articles. I will post a couple of them on my Patreon so that you can read them. I mean, you don't have to read them, just so you know that this is taken seriously by the top level social and cultural engineers, and their handlers, the people who are giving them money, NATO or DARPA or the World Health Organization, whatever it is, the globalist organizations that are funding all this research as R&D. They're going to do something with it, and it's not going to be good. It's not going to be for our entertainment, education, or amusement. It's for our control. That's what governments do, after all. Have you figured that out by now? No, you think it's a reality television show starring Donald J. Trump. No, it's not about that at all. So let me conclude by saying what we're seeing here with Pokemon Go is, here's the money phrase for you. It's gamified political oppression. Pokemon Go is all about gamified political oppression, but instead of some sadistic, leather-bound, monocled gulag concentration camp commandant, right, with jackboots, it's going to be Pikachu. Pikachu is going to be your commandant. Yes. Beautiful. See, I told you. Don't fight the last war. The generals are always fighting the last war, right? That's what they said. That's the bromide that they put out there, and that's the difference between the successful field marshal and the yesterday's field marshal, right, on the ash heaps of history. We have to anticipate. We can't fight the last war of television, of movies, of whatever it was out there that people were proud. We're facing a qualitatively, experientially radically different type of enemy here that is in place. So let me conclude here. Let me answer a question that I've been trying to grapple with myself, and I think I have a definitive answer, but I need evidence, and that'll come from you, researchers. So the question I posed to myself was, does Pokemon Go have deep state approval? Or is Pokemon Go itself, is it a product of a well-funded corporate/government NGO consortium of social engineers, planners? And my answer to that is yes, but I do not have definitive evidence of that. I need to find a forensic accountant that can show me where the money is flowing to see whether my hypothesis is valid. But if you want to go by history, you'll have to say yes, because the University of Tokyo has a research center adjacent to Akihabara, which is called Denki City or Electric City, and it has all these game centers, and that's where all the otaku go to buy their electronics and the latest consumer electronics, but to play video games and to find porno tapes and all kinds of material there. And they're studying it there, and so they're looking at it for behavioral purposes, and entering it into their research, and also for cultural engineering, not just for Japan, but I think for the entire world. And I mentioned the porno and all that, right? Akihabara, which used to be, by the way, after World War II, it was a black market center. That's where all the American people, GIs, would steal stuff from the base and sell the surplus to the Japanese people, and they make little radios out of it. Anyway, it has that history, that sort of dark history. It's not the trendy, cool place that you might think it is today, right? So I will say that most of these large research centers, invariably, they are linked with the so-called vice industries. And Japan is so far as popular culture is concerned, Japan is a world leader in porno. I don't know if you realize it or not. And so a lot of these, the game centers, the porn industry, prostitution, and the drinking areas called Mizushobai, the water trade, and that's where the politicians hang out, the corporate people. Everybody comes together in this cauldron of vice to create these different types of cultural products for worldwide distribution. So that's Tokyo, that's Osaka, that's any large Japanese city. But we also see that here in the U.S. We see that the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic that was discussed in an earlier book that I talked about called Chaos, that was ostensibly there to provide medical care for indigent hippies and all that in the Haight-Ashbury section of San Francisco, but it was really a distribution point for methamphetamine and all under the guise of studying drug addiction, right? So check that out, Haight-Ashbury. So there, research, vice together. Then many of you know about Operation Midnight Climax that was run in San Francisco, New York, and other cities. This is way back in 1954, right? This is part of the sub-project of MK Ultra. And you can read all about that in the Search for the Manchurian Candidate, right? David Marks is the name. Or you can look on YouTube. This is part of the lore, right? It's there. And if you're a newbie, search that one out. And then more recently, we see the MIT. MIT stands for Massachusetts Institute of Technology, not made in Taiwan, but the MIT Media Lab. You see the former head was one Joichi Ito, or he would call himself Joy, J-O-I, Joy, which is appropriate because he was kind of a entertainment boy in the Kabukicho area of Tokyo, where all the prostitution, male and female, took place. And that's where Joy Ito was recruited and brought into MI because he doesn't have a degree. He doesn't have even a bachelor's degree. not let alone a graduate degree. He had no experience there. If you want to read about the real story of Joey Ito, look at my friend Yoichi Shimatsu, who's written about Ito and MIT Media Lab and the whole backstory there. And you may remember Joichi Ito's name coming up when Jeffrey Epstein, that whole distraction was unfolding, right? You got us away from the fact that the infrastructure for the election theft was already being put in place, right? So he resigned in shame from MIT Media Lab because he had hosted the one and only Jeffrey Epstein had taken tons of money, run it through there, and it's a money laundry. I mean, they get research done, but it's mostly sort of a pass through for intelligence and all kinds of intrigue and sexual compromise programs and global prostitution, trafficking, drugs, armament. That just look at any of the George Webb tapes and well, they're gone now, but follow his work and you can get the whole backstory there. Most of you are watching this are acquainted with that whole history there. So I'm running out of time here, but I will end by just telling you that another compelling reason, another data point, if you will, why I understand Pokemon Go and Pokemon in general is being part of a larger neurological podification program, not pacification, but podification, because pacification, people have to die. It's ugly, it's bloody, and you might not find any people that have enough callous disregard for human life to pacify people. But you'll find a lot of game heads who will, without any problem at all, podify people. So the final example I will give you about the podification and the gamification of political oppression comes in the day that will live in infamy, December 16th, 2006. And this is when 700 Japanese children watching Pokemon on TV experienced photosensitive epileptic episodes. And beyond them, there were about 10,000 other people, mostly adults and teenagers. In the larger population, they reported a high level of what the journalists call Pokemon shock. They didn't require medical treatment, but in other words, it was a huge hit on the viewing public of the Pokemon episode. And by the way, I'll tell you, it's on YouTube if you want to watch it, but be careful if you have photosensitive epileptic predispositions, right? But you can see it there and see what all the fuss was about. But what is not said, and I'll say here, again, this is a hypothesis. I don't think that was an accident. I think it was an experiment. It was a proof of concept, because what happened is after that, they took the show off the air. They came back 4 months later and they rolled out the next phase of Pokemon. And what it was is traumatic. There had to be a traumatizing ritual event perpetrated on an audience, a live audience. This is part of the occult metaphysics, right? And taking that energy and banking it and moving it into the next phase. And that's where we are now. That's what we saw with Pokemon Go. And if you think this is only a child's distraction or it's a trivial event, let me conclude with a short anecdote about a dear friend of mine whose husband, who's in his 50s, who was a respected medical doctor, who she was walking around town and she was with her children and she saw this man that looked strangely like her husband with a cell phone, like he was playing Pokemon Go. And she said to her kids, "Hey, is that Daddy?" And they said, "Yeah, it's Dad." So here you go. Pokemon Go was the mania had hit mainstream America from top to bottom. It's a force to be reckoned with. We need to look at it. Next time I'll talk to you a little bit before I introduce the next topic. And by the way, Wednesday we have an exciting free-for-all meeting. It's more like a seminar because people bring such interesting insights into the meeting. But for the Patreon people, we're going to have another noontime Pacific Standard Time meeting next Wednesday. But tonight I will see you back at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, with John O'Loughlin and George Webb for the Thursday Trio. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for being with me today. boy, this is a lot of fun, and I will have a lot more fun with you, with your participation in future episodes. There is no dearth of material and fascinating developments in our crazy, wacky world that we'll try to piece together and figure out and overcome. Yes, we will prevail. Good night, ladies and gentlemen. Bye.